Welcome and thanks for joining us for this episode. We're going to be talking today about encapsulation and decapsulation, which at first blush sounds maybe a little violent, but I promise you it's not. Wes described it to me earlier as like those nesting dolls, those Russian nesting dolls, the matryoshkas or however you pronounce it. So what are we going to be covering in this episode?
All right. So we've been talking, in some episodes about things like the OSI model, right? And one of the things that is very important to understand, we talk about each layer kind of assisting layer, providing a service, and then maybe you haven't heard this, but then that layer takes its data and it hands it down to the next layer. And then the next layer, it adds its data in services by encapsulating, like wrapping that layer's services around the upper layer services. And it keeps doing this as it goes down the OSI model until finally, just before, I would say at the frame level, right, we now have the encoding that turns that information into electrical energy somehow, some way, and either sends it over a copper media, a fiber optic media, or radiated energy. But it is important to kind of understand, I think, because it's a very abstract concept of what's going on. You will see as you go into more advanced network training that you will actually look at some of these packets, if you will, and I use that term right now generically, and you're going to see why coming up. But these data units, right, you're going to see that as they pass through networks, your data itself, which is called the payload, right? It's what you actually want to send, right? Not all the stuff that's wrapped around it to get it there, but that's what happens. You have raw data that's a payload, right, up that application layer, and then the application layer provides the services into the network. Well, guess what? It's going to take your data and it's going to wrap it in kind of like an envelope or a drawer, if you will, right? That Russian nesting dolls that we talk about. So I want you to understand that if you need a theoretical concept, right, an analogy, it's kind of like onion layers. I've said the nesting dolls, yeah, right? So one nest doll inside of another doll, inside of another doll, inside of another doll, until you have this really big doll that you give as a gift, I guess. All right, well, the doll that's down there in the smallest portion inside of that is actually the payload. And all those extra dolls are all the services that are being provided by those layers as it makes its way out to the electrical media and travels the PSTN lines or whatever cables it comes over. That's what we're going to talk about in this episode here.
So what you just described, how it's adding and adding and adding and then it goes out, that's encapsulation, and decapsulation is the reverse of that?
That's exactly it. So let's go ahead and take a look here. So remember that we talk about the application layer. So when I say application data, I'm talking about the services that it's providing, right? So I have HTML information. Remember, that's just a text document. It's not going to go anywhere unless I have a service that allows that to hit the network, and that's HTTP, right? So we're going to take that data and we're going to wrap it in a service at the application layer, right? And then what's going to happen is that layer 7, it's providing a service. That service is called a protocol data unit, all right? And a little bit technical here. I want you to be able to identify that. Now, as the layer provides its services, those are called protocol data units. It is done with its services. It passes, and here's where the layers come. It passes its information down to the next layer, and this is kind of where the nesting doll comes in. We just took the smallest nesting doll and we put it in a bigger nesting doll. Or we took the smallest portion of the onion that's unwrapped and we wrapped a layer around it, and now we're going to hand it down to the presentation layer. Now, when we do that, an upper layer's services that are being relied on by a lower service is called a service data unit, an SDU, all right? And I want you to know that too. So if at that layer, its services that it provides is called a PDU. Once it's done and it hands it down, it now needs, and here's how you can remember it, it now needs the services provided by the next layer. That data at layer 7 is now the service data unit. It's relying on the services that are going to be provided by the presentation layer, right? And then that's that doll into a bigger doll, but we're not done. Now the presentation layers define what the format and the syntax, remember the translator for the network, we know whether we need compression or encryption, we know what kind of format it has to be in. It has provided its protocol data unit, its services right here. All right, to the application layer. Remember, it's helping the layer above it. So then it wraps all of that information into a presentation data SDU. Now, I want you to understand something. Notice that each layer, I don't have any information about the layer that's above the layer that handed down. Why? Because they're not aware of it, right? A layer that is above another layer doesn't have to be aware of any of the services below it. That's the beauty of it. I did my work. Throw it to the next person, you take care of it, right? And now that's a little brutal sometimes. That's almost like Florida construction work. But that's what's going on here. And I want to take a stop here. So far, we doing all right there, Sophia?
I think so. So you've got this illustrated as the application data inside the presentation data, like a nesting doll, right? And then that block representing the presentation data in the session data, that's also got the application
That's
data.
got all of the information above it.
So it just builds.
It just keeps building and keeps building. And you're going to see that at the end. We'll have a fully convoluted data packet by the time it's supposed to happen. But you'll see it at the end. So what we're doing is we're constantly adding more data to our payload as it goes down. Now, we do it theoretically as saying, hey, it's encapsulating it. And it is because once the application, or let's say session data or the presentation information doesn't know anything about the session layer, doesn't even understand it, and it doesn't have to.
Okay.
So that's why when it does its service, the session layer only sees the presentation layer's information. It doesn't know anything above it, which is really good. Now, I will say that there are some markers that they can put on stuff so lower level protocols kind of understand what's going on, but they don't have to. For the most part, they're blind to it. All right, so I could, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say, let me just do a little modification on the fly. You could essentially say that it would look, oops, let me bring this one to the back real quick. Send to the back. All right, you could kind of say that it looks a little bit like this. Let me get this one back here, bring to the front. And we will get this, right? So you could say that when we hand that presentation data down, it kind of looks like this,
okay.
Right?
Yeah.
But we don't need to do all that. I didn't do all of that because of the fact that at the end of the day, the session layer is only aware of the presentation data. It's only aware of that layer before it. So that's what's happening. Now, as we you'll see that, and really, we're just doing this over and over and over and over and over again, right? But I do want you to kind of know that there are some units, data units of measurement that are at specific levels. And that's where another important thing about knowing about encapsulation and decapsulation. See, up until this point, we really just have our data here, but our data is we're going to figure out, do we need to break that data down into more efficient units through something like transmission control protocol and reassemble it on the other end? Well, those are called segments. Your data units of measurement at layer 5 layer 4, the transport layer, are called segments. When we hand down from the transport layer to the network layer, all right, what we want to know is that now the data units of measurement here are called packets. A lot of the documentation that you will see just generically talks about packets. In fact, I just told you that I'm using it generic, right? Just as a generic reference, for a data unit of measurement. But that's not technically accurate, all right? We have to know that the context is packets are the unit of measurement at layer 3 of the OSI model. Once the services, the PDU there, it wraps those services and hands its stuff down to the layer 2, they're now called frames. I want you to understand that your routers operate on data packets. Your switches, as you will go on to learn at layer 2, they deal with frames, all right? And then at the end of the day, we have a fully formatted frame that is now handed down to the physical layer that uses an encoding process to turn it into the electrical bits that get sent over the physical medium. Now, Sophia, you said, so essentially, we got a lot of extra information and I'm not really showing all that. I went ahead and I wanted to show you the final process here and more of to what it would look like, right? So the first part of it was really just for conceptual frame, the conceptual information. But I want you to notice something. It doesn't start here and go here. At the end, this is now a frame at the data link layer, right? And then on that frame, so this would be your header. This is all the extra information that you've added to get your information where it needs to go in that data unit. What I didn't put, and I should put right here, is another portion of this packet, this payload, or I'm sorry, this essentially frame, right? Let me see if I can, we should always do this on the fly, right? So I'm going to go ahead and step off and do something that I don't usually do. But I want to also say that if we have a frame, we also have what's known as a footer, all right? What's the footer? All right, I'm not going to color code it here, so just bear with me on the color coding. Well, that is a cyclic redundancy check. It's a 32-bit value that your frames use to determine if there's errors in the frame and if they need to discard it and retransmit, right? So it's important to understand the overall total. What happens to your data as it goes through this OSI model? Well, kind of back to what Sophia was alluding to, just a bunch of extra information that's added to all your data. So remember the envelope analogy? I can write a letter. I can't put it in the mail. Presentation layer, I need to set it into an envelope, right? The session layer, I need to figure out, do I need delivery confirmation with return receipt? Transport layer, that's where they implement the connection, the delivery confirmation analogy, right? Or do I just put it in the blue mailbox, best effort delivery, right? We get down to that network layer, we're adding more information to that envelope, a source and destination address, right? Now we can get it across the carrier system, and it doesn't have to be the local carrier system. Once it gets to the endpoint, remember the frame? That's like being at the carrier's sorting facility, right? Oh, well, now we're here in the local network here. We got to sort this mail. Physical layer, putting that mail in that bag, sending it on that truck, and delivering it to the mailbox, right? So that's kind of what's happening. You have a lot that is going on to get your data where it needs to go. Now, I don't know if I did this, Sophia, but I want to kind of talk about, yeah, there we go, decapsulation. Now, it looks all the same, I realize. Well, Wes, you did a really good job there. But I'm going to go ahead and take this part of this off, right? This was just to show you that that was total what's going on now that you're down at the that data link layer. So one of the things that Sophia mentioned very early on is that, hey, when you're going down the OSI model, you're encapsulating. And then she said when you're coming back up the OSI model, you're decapsulating. And that's absolutely true, because every layer knows what it needs to process. It doesn't, so for instance, the data link layer doesn't know the application layer. It's not going to process that data. It doesn't even worry about it, right? So what happens is as you go back up the OSI model, these headers get processed through each layer back up to the presentation layer where the payload is finally delivered to the end user. It could be just as simple as an email. It could be a web page, right? But that's the decapsulation process. That's every layer saying, oh, that's my MAC address. Okay, let's go ahead and let's process that information. Oh, let me see. What's the destination address? Oh, that's my destination IP address. Obviously, it's not saying this is the network stack doing that. It processes the network data. Now, the transport information's kind of already been processed, because if you think about it, the transport is something I probably should mention too. When you look at these models, you think that they abstractly go like this. They don't. They go here, they stop, they come back up, they stop, they go, and then they go down. And let me show you what I mean by this. So when we're doing something like we're hopping over routing networks, right? Your routers are actually replacing the layer 2 information with their MAC address, saying, oh, I see the next router in the process, and it attaches the MAC address to the next hop router. And then that router says, oh yeah, that's my MAC address, and it processes it. But then it gets to the destination IP address and says, oh, that's not my IP address. That's across the internet somewhere, right? So what it does is it says, all right, let me look at the next hop, and it puts the MAC address to the next router that's the next hop. And then it processes that information. It says, hey, is that my MAC address? Yeah, that's my MAC address. Is this my IP address? No, but I'm on the local network that's connected to that. So it uses ARP to say, hey, I got this IP address, resolve it to a MAC address. And now it's delivered to the computer. And the computer says, yeah, that's my IP address. That's my transport data. And again, this information's kind of already used. Let's reduce or reverse the syntax that was necessary to put it on the network so that we can now view it in plain sight in your application. Again, keep in mind the transport layer will say, hey, I need to start a session. Everything below it'll stop. just wait. Let me set your session up. Let me define the parameters of the communication, because we can't start sending anything until we have those decided. So that communication has to go to the endpoint. We have to establish that session. And then once that session establishment happens, then we transport our information to the destination, and we go through those minor hops and changes until we finally get to the local area network. The router hands it off to the network. ARP calls out and says, hey, who's this MAC address? We deliver it to the IP and MAC address map. It delivers it to the local computer, and then the local computer can process the top of the stack. That is the encapsulation and decapsulation process in a nutshell.
So real quick, when you went through the encapsulation process, you talked about SDUs and PDUs and kind of explained what they were. How do those factor into the decapsulation process? Is it
okay? Yes. So give you an example. There's something called a BPDU. That's a bridge protocol data unit. It's the only one you really care about in networking. You have to know these conceptually, and I do want you to understand that. But really, the only one I really ever interact with is the bridge protocol data unit at layer 2, because it affects spanning tree algorithm. When you need to do root bridge election, we'll modify that BPDU. In fact, we have PDU guards to make sure that we don't cause broadcast storms on our networks and stuff like that. So that's really the only actual PDU that I've interacted with. A lot of the other ones are they're still the same thing, but that once you get in those upper layers, they get more conceptual, and you're really dealing with the software developers at that time.
Okay, so when you're actually hands-on working with this stuff, it's more the BPDU that you mentioned.
Because that's a bridge protocol data unit, and that's why I take the time to mention the PDUs. But really, at the end of the day, that's the one that you're going to be manipulating, if anything. I mean, we have spanning tree protocol, and it does bridge election by itself. But when you want to manipulate it, you actually have to manipulate that PDU.
Okay, well, I definitely feel a lot more informed, and I did enjoy the color coding. It reminded me of Smarties, like the colors.
Yes.
So I did enjoy that. That was aesthetically pleasing.
I was going to say fruit stripe gum, but it's actually going out of business.
Really?
Yeah, the flavor's only going to last for about 2 more weeks.
Oh, that's depressing. Well, we'll end on a happy note. I feel like we learned a lot in this episode. So thank you for walking us through this process and showing us how all of that works. And thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.